at stringed instruments. And what we really want to do is be able to take what we've learned about stringed instruments and apply them to actual musical instruments. So I brought with me several actual stringed musical instruments, and let's see if we can apply what we've already learned to them. Now, there's a couple different main ways that musicians express themselves with a musical instrument. And the two main things that they control are the pitch and the loudness. Pitch and loudness are the two main. There are other ways, but that's the two main ways, is controlling the pitch and the loudness. In physics terms, we would say the frequency and the amplitude. Frequency and amplitude, those would be the things. Now, when it comes to the frequency, stringed instruments, there's really three main factors that determine the frequency of a stringed instrument. One is the linear mass density of the string. That is the mass per length of the string. Some strings are really light, and those are used for the high frequency sounds, and some strings are heavier, and those are used for the lower frequency sounds. But each instrument will have some different strings. Now, this banjo has metal strings. Some are wound and some are just solid metal. I have a ukulele. It's got plastic strings. I've got an electric bass, and that has a heavy strings. Okay, so we look at the linear mass density. Now, that's not something the musician deals with during the performance. That's something they set beforehand. They get their strings set up. Now, another thing they look at is tension. Tension determines the speed of the wave. The linear mass density and the tension determine the speed of the wave in the string, and that affects the frequency of the string. So with tension, do the tension with the pegs up here at the top, okay? And we change the pegs that will increase the tension. Higher the tension, the higher the frequency. The lower the tension, the lower the frequency. So we have the tension. Once again, that's not something you typically change during the performance. That's something you typically do before the performance. Okay? Now, the third thing is really the thing that most string musicians are spending most of their time dealing with, and that is the length of the string. We have different length strings. In this banjo, I have a short string here, and then I have some longer strings. But different length strings will give you different frequencies. And that's really kind of the key. Now, when it comes to the piano, you really select the string, okay? Whereas in some instruments, you're actually changing the length of the strings. Now, in the piano, you have 88 keys, but each key can hit up to 3 strings. So you have like 230 strings in a piano. Some of the keys are hammering on 3 strings, some 2, and the lower ones only hit on 1 string. Okay. Now, but what the musician does is they simply select and say, I want to play that string, which has a certain tension, a certain linear mass density, and a certain length, and that determines its pitch. Now, harpists also would have strings that have a certain length, certain tension, certain linear mass density, and they simply pick the strings with their fingers. Okay, they pluck them with their fingers. Now, I don't have a harp, but I do have an auto harp. Okay, you don't see an auto harp played a lot, but they're used a lot in the folk music. And the auto harp has strings with some different lengths. You have short strings over here, and then you have longer strings and even longer strings. Okay, you change the tension. Up here, use a wrench to change the tension. They're anchored down here. There's the bridge down here at the bottom. Okay. Now, you might notice these strings up here at the top all have the same length. But if you look closely, you can tell that some of these strings they're thicker. That's a larger linear mass density. Okay. Now, you also say, well, gosh, I got all these different notes. That doesn't sound that good. Am I going to have to pick out individual strings? And no, on the auto harp, it makes it kind of easy. So what they have is they have these bars. Okay, they have these bars and they have letters on them, different types of chords, different types of arrangements. And then what they have is each bar has little felt pads, and the felt pads stop most of the strings from vibrating and only allow certain ones to vibrate, ones that are in the chord and sound good. And so this one is, auto harp is kind of fun to play. Okay, let's see if I can play something here. So that's the auto harp. Also has a little hole, that's a resonator. It's a little cavity in there, allows you to hear it. This is an acoustic instrument. Most of your acoustic instruments will have that resonator. Okay. Now, if you have only a few strings, you've got to make each string play several different notes. And that's where we change the length. But how do you know what length to do? Well, that's where these little lines come in. These frets are actually raised. And when you put your finger on the string, it actually will stop the vibration at the fret. So the vibration typically is going to go between the bridge down here, and this is called the nut up there. Okay, so the bridge and the nut. And that gives you the length. Well, now, in the music system most people deal with, as we talked about before, the frequency of a half step, frequency change, is about 6%, 5.9%, that 12th root of 2. And so it's a 6% change, roughly speaking. Now, so what you'll notice is that these frets are getting closer together. Because if you go from the bridge to the nut, measure that distance, and then take that distance and multiply by 94%, or a 6% change, you will get the position of the next fret. If you take that shorter distance, multiply by 94%, you will get where the next fret is. And since you're taking a 94% of a smaller and smaller distance, the separation between the frets is going to get less. Now, the nice thing is about the frets, it tells you where to go. All you got to do is be close to it. You don't have to be super precise, but you got to be pretty close, and then you'll get the right. It's set for you. Okay. Now that's also true with, say, an instrument like the bass. Okay. So you've got a bass, and once again you have frets, you have the pegs, you have the nut, the bridge at the other end. Okay. So we get the we have the frets once again, and you just put in between. Now, unlike the banjo, you actually play the bass. Your left hand is going to play more with the pads of the fingers as opposed to the fingertips. Okay, so there are some slight differences when you play. But what about the orchestral instruments? They don't have frets. That's true. Now, I don't have any of the orchestral instruments, but I do have a fretless bass. And the fretless bass, like the orchestral instruments, like the violin, the cello, the string bass, they don't have frets on them. So you got to know where the fingers go. Okay. Now, that's good news and bad news. It makes it harder because you don't know where they go, but it gives you more control. When you have the frets, you're kind of limited that I got to go here. Okay. But you can now get things that are in between the 6%. If you want something that's just a little bit higher, a little bit lower, you can do that. Okay, so that would be the case. Now, also the electric instruments, they don't have the resonator, they will have pickups. And so what you have is you have an electric way of sensing the movement of the metal strings, and then that sends a little signal to the amplifier, and the amplifier will then amplify the amplitude of that wave, send it to the speaker, and you'll have that sound. Okay, so we have many different instruments. There's a lot of similarities between them, whether it be the harp, the piano, banjo, ukulele, bass, all those orchestral instruments. There's a lot of similarities between them, and but there are some differences. But we make sure you understand what determines the frequency of the wave. That's the speed of the wave and the wavelength. They'll help you figure that out. The speed of the wave is determined by the medium, which is affected by the linear mass density of the string and the tension in the string. Those two would determine it. And as you play, you're simply going to control those things. So enjoy. Hope that helps. See you later.